The first thing Elena heard when she woke up was the sound of a baby crying. The second thing she heard was the name everyone in the city was terrified to say. Damian Cross. She had never met the infamous Mafia boss, yet somehow, her newborn daughter had brought his world crashing into hers. 3 months earlier, Elena had been a lonely waitress trying to survive after losing her apartment and nearly giving up on everything. One reckless night, one stranger, and one decision she barely remembered had changed the course of her life forever. Now she was standing inside a mansion surrounded by armed guards, holding a baby whose tiny face looked strangely familiar to the most dangerous men in the city. Damian stared at the child in silence. Then his eyes lifted toward Elena, and for the first time in years, the feared Mafia boss looked completely lost. If stories about second chances mean something to you, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to Kindness Studio for more emotional stories about love, courage, and second chances. Elena had never planned to become a mother alone. Her pregnancy had been difficult, filled with unpaid bills, sleepless nights, and the constant fear that something would happen to her baby. She had searched for the mysterious man from that night, but she had only known his first name. She never imagined he was Damian Cross, the man whose name appeared in newspapers beside stories about missing criminals, underground businesses, and powerful enemies. When Damian finally discovered the truth, he didn't react with anger. He simply stood beside the crib and watched his daughter sleep. Something inside him changed when the baby wrapped her tiny fingers around his hand. The man who had spent his entire life believing emotions were weaknesses suddenly found himself terrified of losing someone. But Elena was frightened of him. She had heard the rumors. She knew what kind of man Damian was supposed to be. He controlled half the city's underground operations, and people whispered that even police officers avoided crossing him. She expected threats, demands, and coldness. Instead, Damian quietly asked what the baby needed. He learned how to prepare bottles. He stayed awake when the baby had a fever. He stood outside Elena's bedroom every night because he didn't want her to feel unsafe. He never demanded that she love him or even trust him. That confused her more than cruelty would have. Days became weeks. Elena began seeing the men behind the reputation. She discovered that Damian hated hospitals because his mother had died in one when he was young. She learned that he secretly paid school fees for children in the neighborhood where he grew up. She found out he kept an old photograph of his younger sister, who had disappeared years earlier after being taken by one of his father's enemies. That photograph became important later. One afternoon, Elena accidentally saw it on Damian's desk. The young woman in the picture looked almost exactly like her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Damian stared at Elena, then at the photograph, and something cold moved through his expression. He immediately contacted an old family lawyer and ordered him to investigate Elena's past. The results arrived 2 days later. Elena had been adopted as a baby. Her biological parents were unknown. But the lawyer had found something else. Elena's adoption records had been altered 27 years earlier, shortly after Damian's younger sister disappeared. Damian became convinced Elena might be his missing sister. Suddenly, everything changed. The growing feelings between Elena and Damian became impossible to understand. Elena had begun caring for him. Damian had begun imagining a future with her. But if the documents were true, they were connected by blood. Damian immediately pulled away. He stopped entering Elena's room. He stopped sitting beside her at breakfast. He became distant and formal, even though every part of him wanted to explain what was happening. Elena thought she had done something wrong. She carried the baby downstairs one evening and found Damian standing alone in the library. She asked why he had suddenly become a stranger. He couldn't tell her the truth without destroying everything. So he finally gave her the photograph. Elena looked at the young woman in the picture and felt a strange sadness she couldn't explain. She had spent her entire life wondering where she came from. Now she was terrified of finding out. The investigation continued. Then came the twist nobody expected. The adoption records had been forged. Elena wasn't Damian's sister. The woman in the photograph had been Damian's real sister, but she had died years earlier. Someone had deliberately altered Elena's records to make her appear connected to the Cross family. The reason was even more terrifying. Damian had an enemy named Victor Hale, a former associate who wanted control of Damian's empire. Victor had discovered that Damian had finally found something he loved more than power. He had created the fake family connection because he knew it could destroy Damian emotionally and separate him from Elena. But Victor made one mistake. He underestimated Elena. Instead of running, she demanded the truth. She helped Damian uncover the people responsible for changing her records. Together, they discovered that the woman who had adopted Elena had once worked for Victor's family. Elena's entire childhood had been built around a secret she had never been allowed to know. For the first time, Damian understood that Elena wasn't someone who needed to be protected like a fragile person. She was strong. She had survived poverty, loneliness, motherhood, fear, and betrayal without ever becoming cruel. And that was when Damian realized he had fallen completely in love with her. Not because she was the mother of his child. Not because she had accidentally entered his dangerous world. But because she had shown him something he had forgotten existed. A life that didn't revolve around fear. When Victor eventually came after them, Damian was prepared to fight, but Elena refused to hide. She stood beside him, holding their daughter, while the truth about Victor's crimes was finally exposed. The empire Damian had built through fear began to collapse around him. He knew he could continue living as the city's most feared man, or he could become the father his daughter deserved. He chose his daughter. He walked away from the criminal world. It wasn't easy. People he once trusted betrayed him. Enemies followed him. He lost money, influence, and the identity he had carried for most of his life. But every evening, when he came home and saw Elena rocking their daughter to sleep, he realized he had gained something worth more than everything he had lost. 1 year later, Damian opened a small security company using money he had legally earned and donated much of his remaining fortune to families in the neighborhood where he had grown up. Elena went back to school and began studying social work because she wanted to help women who had experienced the same loneliness she once knew. Their daughter grew into a happy little girl who knew nothing about the dangerous world her parents had escaped. One quiet evening, Elena stood beside the window watching Damian play with their daughter in the garden. She remembered the frightened woman she had been when she first entered his mansion. She barely recognized herself. Damian came inside, took her hand, and looked at her with the same tenderness he had discovered only after becoming a father. They had started with fear. They had survived secrets. They had nearly lost each other because of a lie. But sometimes life doesn't give us the family we expected. Sometimes it gives us people who choose us, protect us, challenge us, and teach us what home really means. And sometimes the greatest second chance doesn't arrive after everything goes right. It arrives after everything almost falls apart. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who believes people can change, and subscribe to Kindness Studio. Your support helps these emotional stories reach more people who may need a little hope. Before we end, I have one special request. Comment, everyone deserves a second chance, if you believe that even a broken life can find a beautiful new beginning. Because Elena didn't find a perfect life. Damian didn't become a perfect man. They simply chose, every day, to become better than the people they had been yesterday. And as their daughter laughed between them, Elena finally understood something she had spent her whole life searching for. Home was never a place. Home was the people who stayed.